Jon Mendez here with another of our little how-tos. And I thought it might be rather interesting to have a look at overfalls, how quickly they build, and why what can look like a little wiggle on the chart can be quite interesting in real life. So we've borrowed a rather nice boat for this. It's a Dale Nelson 37, and I think you've had it about 3 weeks. So they're very, very kind of them to let us have a go at this. And we're off Cowes, where it's notorious for a little bit of wind against tide. So we just thought we'd show how quickly it builds. So high water here today was around about 9ish. Tide in the Solent always turns a bit early. So now we've got a good ebb. And when I look at the buoy up ahead of us, we've got probably 2 knots ebbing already against a southwesterly 4 or 5. So a nice little bit of wind against to give us a learning moment of why you want to think about it. So I'm just bringing us gently round, so we're in a position where we're going to go pretty much dead upwind. We've got tide under the boat. So the tide's giving us probably 2 knots of speed straight away. And we've probably got 16, maybe 18 knots of wind. And you'll see that we get a little bit of spray as I accelerate the boat. And that's mainly because we have a beautiful semi-displacement hull, which means even though we've got a huge flare, we are pushing quite a lot of water. And going upwind means we're going up and down every little one of these waves which is being generated by that wind. So having accelerated, and I'm going to have to put the wipers on for a moment, once the bow starts to lift, I then a much drier ride. And obviously because we're going past a little headland, because it sticks out into the sea, that's accentuating the water movement. So that's really focusing the tide to rush around that headland and make it rougher than we would ideally like. So where you position yourself in relation to the headland can make the weather really interesting or not bad. Now, like all boats which plane, whether it's semi or full planing, there's an optimum speed. If we go too slow, we're throwing up an awful lot of water. So we've got a reasonably gentle motion over this sea, but we are throwing up a lot of water. So we can make the boat wonderfully salty, but we can also, if we're unlucky, suck some of that salty water back in. So strangely enough, slightly quicker is better. So just down to 15 knots, and it's quite a wet ride, bring just a little bit of power on, and that bow lifts beautifully. Now, once I've got the bow up and my speed on, so I'm just bringing it on to around about 17, 18 knots. If it was rougher, I can use the trim tabs to just bring the bow down. So both tabs together, and that drops the bow quite substantially, and that makes the ride much smoother, and we've got enough boat speed that we're still throwing the water out of the way. So it's a fine balance between too much boat speed, a lot of crashing and bashing, too little boat speed, really wet, and a nice balance with a little bit of tab. We're keeping the bow doing its best to cut the waves, and we're getting a nice dry ride. Having done a little bit of upwind but down tide, we've managed to end up much further down the Solent than I anticipated. So going back, we've now got the wind behind us and we've got the tide on the bow. So strange enough, it will actually be a drier ride because it's the wind which really makes the shape of the wave. So we're going effectively downhill on the wind. We won't need much tab because the bow will naturally sit high. And what we've got to think about is, and they're not big waves, but we never want to be in a position where we're accelerating too fast. By that I mean we don't want to overtake the waves. We want to try and maintain a speed of about the speed the sea's doing. Occasionally as the wave dissipates, we'll power on through. There's not enough wave action here to make that really necessary, but it's just something to be aware of. So we'll accelerate, we'll look behind us, make sure it's clear, bring the boat nicely up. We're only doing 10 knots in this direction, so tide's having a dramatic effect on us, and you can see as I get the power a little bit further on, the stern of the boat gets picked up and shoved around far more because the bow's so fine it's steering down the face of every wave. I'm going to take the tabs off, see if that gives us slightly better straight line stability, and it's slightly better, but I can see I'm trying to have to work quite hard to keep the boat going relatively straight, which is comfy and much drier, much drier. So going downwind in a motorboat is generally preferable to upwind for comfort, but if you're against the tide, that will be slowing you down. So as long as you're not going too far upwind, you can make good progress, but it can be wet, and if it's windy, it can be very bouncy. So one of the things I've learned over the years is if you're on quite a wet boat, if you know you're going to be going somewhere upwind as a destination, go slightly past, turn, so you're then going downwind before you slow down, and then you don't get the whole boat soaking wet all over again. Much happier for the crew, they're not working on a soaking wet boat. So go past your destination, 200 yards, turn the boat, slow it down, and it all stays dry. Now, what do we do about overfalls? Obviously, we can plan our passage so that we avoid them completely, but there's often times when we need to get somewhere. So generally, overfalls occur where something sticks out into the sea. It might be a headland, might be a ridge under the sea. So we can go much further out and completely miss out that obstruction, which means the sea generally is calmer. Or the other option is we go really shallow, so we can go really close to the land, and you'll often find there's a patch somewhere between the 3 and 5 metre contour where the wave action and the tide action and the wind, for whatever reason, they kind of miss out the first 30, 40 metres, and you can find some really flat water really close in. Now, you've got to engage brain and make sure you know exactly what the depth is if you're going to play that game, but quite often there's a nice, sheltered, much calmer patch close inshore.